Dorian Alistair and Selene Vaughn had once been the ultimate power couple, wealthy, admired, and seemingly untouchable. But behind the facade of luxury and prestige, betrayal brewed like a slow-burning fire. When Selene, pregnant with their child, uncovered Dorian's secret marriage to his mistress, Lyra Moreau, she didn't break down. She didn't beg or plead. Instead, she plotted. And by the time Dorian realized the storm was coming, it was too late. The empire he had built was about to crumble, not from an outsider's attack, but from the woman he had underestimated the most. Dorian Vance was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went. A self-made billionaire with a vast empire spanning luxury real estate, technology, and high-end fashion, he had built his fortune from the ground up. Every magazine cover, every business journal, and every high society event highlighted his success, portraying him as a visionary, a leader, and a devoted husband. To the outside world, Dorian had it all: a powerful reputation, an extravagant lifestyle, and a wife who adored him. Selene Vance was the picture-perfect billionaire's wife, elegant and intelligent, with a quiet strength that complemented her husband's dominance. Their marriage, often admired by others, seemed unshakable, and with a child on the way, their future appeared even brighter. Their sprawling estate sat on acres of pristine land, boasting marble floors, custom-built chandeliers, and art pieces worth millions. Everything about their life exuded perfection. Lavish vacations in private villas, exclusive charity galas, and luxurious gifts were all part of the lifestyle they had cultivated together. Dorian was a man who knew how to create an image, and Selene had played the role of his devoted wife seamlessly for years. She had stood by his side at business events, smiled for the cameras, and helped build the illusion of an unbreakable power couple. But what the world did not see was the growing distance between them. The late nights at the office, the constant business trips, and the way Dorian's phone was always face down on the table, all subtle signs that something was off. Selene noticed these changes, though she chose to ignore them at first. She had grown accustomed to his demanding work schedule and his need for control, convincing herself that his absence was a sacrifice for their future. But as time went on, small inconsistencies began to pile up. Cancelled plans, secretive calls, and unexplained charges on their accounts hinted at something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't until one evening, as she prepared for bed, that she felt the undeniable weight of suspicion settle over her. Dorian had left his laptop open in his office, something he never did. It was as if the universe had placed an opportunity before her, daring her to uncover the truth. A simple glance turned into an unraveling of secrets she was never meant to find. Bank statements with offshore transfers, hidden email exchanges, and flight confirmations to destinations he had never mentioned. Each discovery deepened the pit in her stomach, painting a picture of a betrayal far greater than she had imagined. She took a deep breath and steadied herself before digging further. It wasn't just an affair, it was something far worse: legal. Documents in a foreign language, signed under an alias, confirmed her worst fear. Dorian had married someone else in secret. The date of the wedding was chilling, happening during a supposed business trip just over a year ago. This was not a fleeting infidelity or a reckless mistake. This was a calculated deception, carefully constructed to keep his two lives separate. Selene's hands trembled as she scrolled through photographs attached to the documents. The woman's face was unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking the affectionate way Dorian held her. Her name, Lyra Moreau, was one Selene had never heard before. Yet here she was, legally bound to the man she had trusted with her life. The final blow came when she saw another set of medical documents, a pregnancy confirmation under Lyra's name. The betrayal was complete. A million emotions swirled within her: anger, heartbreak, humiliation, but she did not let them consume her. Instead, she took a deep breath and shut the laptop. The image of her husband, a man she had once believed was untouchable, was now shattered beyond repair. Selene knew she had two choices: confront him and let emotions dictate the outcome, or step back, gather her strength, and destroy him in a way he would never see coming. She chose the latter. Selene sat in silence, her mind racing as she processed the betrayal that had just unraveled before her eyes. Every moment she had spent as Dorian's loyal wife now felt like a cruel joke. She had dedicated years to standing by his side, trusting in the life they had built together, only to discover that he had already replaced her. The pain was suffocating, but Selene refused to let it consume her. She would not allow herself to become just another woman scorned, crying in the shadows while her husband continued his double life without consequences. No, she would take control. She would make sure that everything Dorian had built came crumbling down around him. Her first move was to gather proof. Rage and heartbreak alone wouldn't be enough to destroy a man as powerful as Dorian. She needed undeniable evidence, something solid enough to dismantle his empire piece by piece. The documents she had found on his laptop were a good start, but she needed more details, more records, more leverage. She called in a private investigator, someone discreet and highly skilled, to dig deeper. She didn't tell him everything, only that she suspected Dorian of hiding financial assets and possibly engaging in illegal activities. Within days, the investigator confirmed what Selene already suspected. Dorian had multiple offshore accounts, some of which were tied to Lyra Moreau. There were wire transfers in the millions, real estate properties hidden under shell companies, and a secret trust fund that he had set up in Lyra's name. But the biggest revelation was still to come. The investigator uncovered something even more damaging. Lyra was not just another woman seeking wealth and status. She was actively working to secure her place in Dorian's life, pushing him to make drastic changes to his estate and business holdings. Legal drafts suggested that Dorian had been planning to move large portions of his assets into accounts that Lyra would have access to, effectively cutting Selene out of his fortune. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had been preparing to discard her entirely. Selene knew she had to act fast. The longer she waited, the more control Lyra would gain over Dorian's finances. But she couldn't afford to make a mistake. If Dorian suspected that she knew the truth, he would tighten his defenses, making it harder to bring him down. She needed to be strategic. She started with something small. Over dinner, she casually brought up the topic of estate planning, pretending to be concerned about securing their child's financial future. She observed Dorian closely as he answered, taking note of the slight hesitation in his voice, the way he carefully chose his words. He was lying, but he didn't think she knew. That was good. That meant he was still vulnerable. Over the next few weeks, Selene played her part flawlessly. She acted as if nothing had changed, as if she were still the same devoted wife who trusted her husband completely. She smiled at social events, kissed him goodbye when he left for his so-called business trips, and pretended not to notice when he spent hours texting someone else. Meanwhile, she worked behind the scenes, making moves that Dorian wouldn't see coming. She began discreetly shifting funds from their shared accounts, securing money that Dorian wouldn't be able to touch once everything fell apart. She met with lawyers, ensuring that when the time came, she would have the legal upper hand. She even reached out to key figures within Dorian's business empire, longtime investors, board members, and silent partners, hinting at potential scandals without revealing too much, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. As she laid the groundwork for Dorian's downfall, Selene also turned her attention to Lyra. She needed to understand the woman who had taken her husband, to anticipate her next move before she made it. The private investigator provided detailed reports on Lyra's past, her previous relationships, her financial habits, and her weaknesses. Selene studied them carefully, searching for a way to use them to her advantage. She was no longer the betrayed wife, waiting for justice to find her. She was the one in control now, and when the time was right, she would strike. Selene had always been a woman of patience, but now, patience had become her weapon. Every move she made was calculated, designed to lead Dorian into a trap he wouldn't see coming. The groundwork was nearly complete. His financial empire, once impenetrable, had cracks forming beneath the surface. Investors were becoming uneasy, small legal disputes were surfacing, and whispers of scandal were beginning to make their way through the business world. But it still wasn't enough. Selene wanted complete destruction. She wanted him to feel the full weight of betrayal, just as she had. She turned her focus to Lyra Moreau. The woman had managed to seduce her husband and manipulate him into altering his entire financial future. Selene had no doubt that Lyra was playing a long game, slowly embedding herself into Dorian's world until she became impossible to remove. But Lyra had one major flaw. She had underestimated Selene. Selene used the investigators' reports to dig deeper into Lyra's past. There was no shortage of dirt. Lyra had a history of targeting wealthy men, using charm and deception to climb higher in social status. She had been engaged twice before, both relationships ending under suspicious circumstances. One fiancé had suffered a financial collapse shortly before their wedding, while another had been forced into a legal battle over stolen assets. Selene saw the pattern immediately. Lyra wasn't just a mistress, she was a predator. But Lyra had made a mistake by attaching herself to Dorian. Unlike her past targets, Dorian had a wife who refused to fade into the background. Selene crafted a plan that would ensure Lyra's downfall as well. She started by leaking select pieces of information to financial reporters, just enough to make Lyra's involvement with Dorian suspicious. A few anonymous tips placed in the right hands, and suddenly, whispers of an affair weren't just gossip. They became speculation about whether Dorian had been funneling company funds into Lyra's accounts. Board members began asking questions, and the first signs of panic crept into Dorian's carefully curated image. At the same time, Selene set up a meeting with one of Lyra's former fiancés, a man named Tobias Langley. His engagement to Lyra had ended in financial ruin, and Selene suspected he still harbored resentment. She wasn't wrong. Tobias was more than willing to share what he knew, painting a picture of a woman who moved from one powerful man to the next, always leaving destruction in her wake. Armed with this information, Selene made her next move. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, ensuring that when she struck, there would be no way for Dorian to escape the consequences. She initiated a quiet legal maneuver, freezing certain joint assets under suspicion of fraudulent activity. At the same time, she made a confidential report to financial regulators, highlighting discrepancies in Dorian's overseas accounts. The moment he realized what was happening, it would already be too late. But Selene wasn't done yet. She wanted Dorian to feel the personal betrayal as well, the same way she had. Using a fake email account, she sent an anonymous tip directly to Lyra, revealing that Dorian had been transferring funds back into accounts under Selene's name, making it appear as if he had been preparing to leave Lyra all along. It was a lie, but a believable one. Lyra, greedy and possessive, wouldn't take the risk of being discarded. Selene watched from a distance as everything began to unravel. Dorian's world, once so meticulously built, was beginning to collapse under the weight of his own deception. His business partners were losing confidence. His accounts were under investigation. And Lyra, the woman he had thrown everything away for, was beginning to doubt his loyalty. It was only a matter of time before the final blow landed, and when it did, Selene would be there to watch it all burn. Dorian paced in his private office, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. His phone buzzed non-stop with calls from board members demanding answers, legal advisors warning him of potential investigations, and Lyra, whose tone had shifted from seductive to suspicious. He had built his empire on control, on carefully constructed illusions of power and stability, yet now everything was slipping through his fingers. He couldn't pinpoint where the cracks had started, but they were spreading fast, threatening to bring everything crashing down. At first, he dismissed the financial concerns as minor inconveniences. He had faced legal challenges before and always found a way to silence them. But this time, the problems weren't just external. Some of his own accounts had been frozen, and he had no idea how or why. Transactions he never authorized were showing up under his name, and reports of misallocated funds were reaching regulatory offices. His legal team was struggling to contain the damage. Someone had infiltrated his financial stronghold, and he had no idea who it was. Lyra, meanwhile, had become erratic. She was no longer the poised, calculating woman who had promised him a new future. She was furious. Someone had planted doubts in her mind, and she demanded explanations he didn't have. She accused him of deception, of preparing to abandon her and return to Selene. Her threats escalated quickly. If he didn't prove his loyalty, she would expose everything. He tried to assure her, to regain control over her emotions, but Lyra was unpredictable. She had benefited from his wealth, but she had no intention of going down with him. Selene watched from a distance, unseen but ever present in the destruction she had orchestrated. She had spent weeks waiting for this moment, and now it was unfolding exactly as she had planned. Dorian was unraveling. His once unshakable composure was gone, replaced by frantic attempts to put out fires he couldn't contain. His business, his mistress, and his reputation were all slipping through his fingers. She had positioned herself perfectly. Through carefully placed legal action, she ensured that when the financial collapse reached its peak, she would be protected. Before Dorian even knew what was happening, Selene had transferred key assets to accounts under her sole control. The mansion they once shared was no longer in his name. The luxury cars, the art collection, even portions of his investment portfolio. One by one, she had removed them from his grasp. But Selene wasn't satisfied with financial ruin alone. She wanted Dorian to experience true betrayal, to feel what it was like to be discarded by someone he trusted. That was where Lyra came in. Selene had ensured that the mistress he had risked everything for would turn against him. Lyra, in her panic, had started making demands. She wanted Dorian to secure her future immediately, to transfer assets to her name before it was too late. But Dorian was running out of options. His accounts were being flagged, his business partners were withdrawing support, and now Lyra was pressuring him to act fast. He could see the desperation in her eyes. She wasn't in this for love. She wanted his wealth, and now that it was disappearing, she was ready to jump ship. Then, the final betrayal struck. News broke of an internal investigation into financial misconduct, and sources confirmed that a key witness had come forward. Selene had leaked enough information to make it appear as though Lyra was cooperating with authorities in exchange for immunity. It was a lie, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Dorian was trapped. His mistress no longer trusted him. His investors had abandoned him. His empire was crumbling. And Selene, she had already secured her revenge. She had walked away, untouched, leaving him to watch as everything he had built fell apart. Dorian sat in the dimly lit confines of his penthouse, a place that had once symbolized power and luxury, but now felt like a prison. The silence was suffocating. His phone, once flooded with calls from influential allies, lay untouched. There were no messages, no offers of help. The empire he had built, the wealth he had flaunted, the life he had secured for himself, it was all gone. The walls were closing in, and there was no one left to save him. The scandal had exploded in the media. Reports of financial fraud, internal corruption, and secret accounts funneled through offshore firms were splattered across every major news outlet. Investors had turned on him, and regulators were preparing to launch a full-scale investigation. His company's stocks had plummeted overnight, wiping out billions. The whispers of fraud had become undeniable proof, and the image he had so carefully curated was now shattered. But the worst betrayal wasn't from the media, nor the investors. It was from Lyra, the woman he had sacrificed everything for. The woman he had built a future around had flipped on him the moment she realized he was sinking. She had been questioned by authorities, and desperate to save herself, had agreed to cooperate. Whether she had truly committed a crime or not no longer mattered. She had painted herself as an unwitting victim, claiming that she had been deceived, manipulated by a man who had promised her the world. She played the role of the heartbroken mistress perfectly, feigning shock as she distanced herself from him. With Lyra's testimony and mounting evidence against him, Dorian was left with no escape. He faced impending lawsuits, possible criminal charges, and the complete collapse of his business. His assets had been seized, his accounts frozen, and his once loyal legal team had begun resigning, unwilling to be dragged down alongside him. Selene had orchestrated it all. She had watched patiently as Dorian's downfall unfolded, ensuring that every piece fell into place. By the time he realized she was behind it, it was too late. She had legally distanced herself from the scandal, making it impossible for him to retaliate. Every move he made had been anticipated. Every reaction he had was expected. She had outplayed him at his own game, and now she was walking away with everything. She had filed for divorce in the midst of the chaos, a move that was now widely seen as strategic brilliance. She had secured her share of the wealth before the financial collapse, leaving Dorian with nothing but debt and disgrace. The public painted her as the wronged wife, a woman who had been deceived but had risen above it with grace. She was invited to interviews, praised for her resilience, and admired for the way she had turned the betrayal into an opportunity. Meanwhile, Dorian became a cautionary tale, the billionaire who had it all and lost everything in the blink of an eye. His name became synonymous with greed and recklessness. He was no longer respected, no longer feared, just pitied and ridiculed. As he sat alone, staring at the empty glass in his hand, he wondered how it had come to this. He had been untouchable. He had built an empire, controlled his world, bent people to his will. And yet, the one person he had underestimated had been the one to destroy him. Selene had won. She had taken everything: his wealth, his reputation, his future. And now, as she stood at the peak of her new life, he was left to rot in the ruins of his own making.